Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku created the cure that could save or destroy mankind. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the UA High Science Wing had changed in the 5 years since Izuku Midoriya was a student there. It was still thick with the scent of ozone from Kaminari's occasional misfires in the training halls and the faint, sweet smell of burnt sugar from Sato's baking experiments in the dorms. But layered over it all was a new scent, antiseptic cleanliness, and the hum of bleeding-edge technology. The halls themselves were wider, the walls reinforced with carbon plating and gleaming with a fresh coat of paint. Memorial plaques, small and tasteful, dotted the corridors, sobering reminders of the cost of the fragile peace they now enjoyed. Izuku, now 21, walked these halls not as a student, but as a peer. The green lightning of One for All no longer fractured his bones. It was a second skin, a calm sea of power he could command into a tidal wave at will. He was taller, the frantic energy of his youth settled into a quiet, potent confidence. Scars, thin and white, mapped his arms and hands, a testament to a journey written in pain and perseverance. He was pro-hero Deku, a name that had once been a taunt, now consistently ranked among the top 3 in the nation. But today, he wasn't Deku. Today, he was Midoriya-sensei, a guest instructor and the head of a highly specialized, deeply personal research initiative. He pushed open the heavy blast door labeled Project Evergreen, Quirk Stabilization Control. The lab was his sanctuary. A joint venture between UA and Shield Industries, it was a marvel of modern science. Gleaming chrome consoles cast a soft blue light on the polished floors. Holographic displays flickered with complex genetic sequences and energy metrics. In the center of the room, dominating the space, was the Synaptic Resonance Chamber, SRC, a large, cylindrical apparatus of glass and metal, latticed with wires that glowed with contained power. It was Melissa Shield's masterpiece. Melissa herself was hunched over a console, her blonde hair tied back in a practical, messy ponytail. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her fingers flying across a holographic keyboard. Energy fluctuations are within a 0.02% tolerance, Izuku, she said without looking up. The biosympathetic polymer is stable. We're ready for the catalyst introduction. Izuku gave a slight nod, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on their third and most important team member. Aries sat in a comfortable chair in the corner, a sketchbook open on her lap. Now 13, she had grown into her features, though a lingering caution still lived in her wide, ruby-red eyes. The single horn on the right side of her forehead, once a source of terror, was now small and smooth, pulsing with a barely perceptible golden light. She was sketching a small, potted sunflower on the windowsill, her tongue poked out in concentration. She had come so far from the terrified child locked away by the shy Hasaikai. She could laugh now, a sound that was still precious and rare. She could control her quirk, rewind, to a small degree, mending paper cuts, revitalizing wilted plants. But anything more was a risk. The ghost of overhaul still haunted the deeper wells of her power. Ready, Eri-chan? Izuku asked, his voice soft. She looked up, a small smile gracing her lips. Ready, Deku-san? There was no fear in her voice, only trust. It was a trust Izuku had spent 5 years earning, a trust he valued more than any hero ranking. The goal of Project Evergreen was not to erase Aries' quirk. It was to give her an anchor. They were attempting to synthesize a bioregulator, a compound that, when introduced into a person's system, would act as a governor on their quirk factor. It would create a stable matrix around the volatile gene, allowing the user to access their power without the risk of it going berserk. It was a theoretical life raft for those with dangerous, self-destructive, or uncontrollable quirks. Their model for this miracle compound was the most unique quirk in existence, One for All. It's the principle of it that's so revolutionary, Melissa had explained months ago, her eyes alight with scientific fervor. One for All is a singularity, a vessel that holds multiple quirk factors without them tearing the user apart. If we can understand how it contains that energy, how it creates that internal harmony, we can replicate the container without the power. We can build the bottle without the lightning. And so, their work began. It was a delicate, painstaking process. Melissa handled the engineering, designing the SRC to analyze and replicate energy signatures on a quantum level. Izuku provided the biological component. He was the key. His blood, his DNA, contained the living blueprint of one for all stabilizing properties. Today was a critical step. For weeks, they had been synthesizing a base polymer, a synthetic genetic scaffold. Now, they were ready to introduce the catalyst, a highly filtered energy signature derived from Izuku's blood, meant to teach the polymer how to behave like one for all's internal structure. All right, Melissa? Let's begin, Izuku said, rolling up the sleeve of his black athletic shirt. He sat in a chair connected to the SRC, placing his arm into a sterile medical brace. Eri, you remember your part? Melissa asked, her voice now a calm, professional cadence. Just focus on the sunflower. Keep your energy steady. We're just going to monitor your baseline resonance as a control. Eri nodded, her gaze fixed on the yellow petals. Her horn glowed a soft, steady gold. On a monitor, a line graph representing her energy output remained a gentle, rolling wave. Okay, Izuku. Commencing catalyst extraction, Melissa announced. A small, automated needle extended from the brace and pricked Izuku's arm with barely a whisper. A single drop of crimson blood was drawn into a vacuum tube and whisked away into the heart of the SRC. Izuku closed his eyes, focusing. He didn't need to activate one for all, not fully. He just needed to let its latent energy, the quiet hum of the 8 previous wielders living within him, resonate. The air in the lab grew heavy, static electricity prickling the hairs on their arms. The lights on the SRC pulsed in time with his heartbeat. Inside the chamber's core, the drop of blood was atomized. Lasers scanned its properties, while electromagnetic fields isolated the unique energy signature of one for all's core. This signature was then projected into a vial containing the clear, viscous biosympathetic polymer. The goal was for the polymer's structure to realign, mimicking the energy-containing pattern. It's working, Melissa breathed, her eyes glued to a holographic display showing the polymer's molecular structure twisting into a complex, beautiful lattice. The resonance is holding. The matrix is forming. It's incredible. The process was hypnotic. The gentle thrum of the machine, the steady pulse of light, the intricate dance of molecules on the screen. For a moment, it felt like they were on the verge of creating a miracle, and then it happened. To initiate the final stage of synthesis, the machine required a tiny surge of external power to bond the new structure. An automated arm, sleek and white, swiveled into place over the main console. It was tipped with a small, precise energy injector, designed to deliver a controlled burst of electricity. The arm lowered. The injector tip gleamed under the lab lights. Click. The sound was tiny, almost imperceptible over the hum of the SRC. A sterile, mechanical noise. For Izuku and Melissa, it was nothing. For Eri, it was the sound of a syringe being prepared. It was the sound of a cold metal table. It was the sound of Overhaul's gloved hand on her arm. Her breath hitched. The sketchbook slipped from her fingers, fluttering to the floor. The image of the sunflower in her mind shattered, replaced by a dark, beaked mask and cold, indifferent eyes. It's for the good of the world, Eri. The voice echoed in her head, a phantom from a nightmare she could never truly escape. Her vision swam. The sleek, modern lab melted away, the walls becoming cold, damp stone. Melissa's focused expression became the chillingly calm face of chronostasis. Izuku, sitting in the chair with the needle in his arm, became one of Overhaul's experiments. No, she whimpered, her hands flying to her head. No, please stop. Her horn, once a soft gold, flared into a blinding, incandescent white. Eri! Izuku shouted, instantly on his feet. The needle tore from his arm, but he didn't even notice. The line graph on the monitor representing her energy output didn't just spike, it broke the scale. A wave of raw, untamed power erupted from her. It wasn't energy, it was anti-energy. It was the concept of time turning back on itself, made manifest. Melissa, shut it down. Izuku roared, already moving, but it was too late. The wave of rewind energy, pure and absolute, slammed into the synaptic resonance chamber. Alarms blared, a cacophony of shrieking klaxons. Red lights flashed, plunging the lab into a hellish strobe effect. The SRC, a pinnacle of modern engineering, buckled under the impossible physics of Ares' quirk. The glass cylinder didn't just shatter, it seemed to unexist for a split second, a fine dust of silicon raining down before the explosion of overloaded components blew outwards. The rewind energy, a storm of golden light, converged on the chamber's core. It struck the atomized drop of Izuku's blood, still resonating with the power of one for all. It struck the biosympathetic polymer, which was in the midst of rewriting its own structure. Power met anti-power. Creation met reversion. The legacy of 9 heroes met the primal force of a single, terrified child. The result was not an explosion. It was an implosion. A sound like a universe being born and dying in the same instant echoed in their bones. A light, not gold or green, but a pure, terrifying white, consumed the center of the lab. Izuku threw himself in front of Eri, wrapping her in his arms, his back taking the brunt of the shockwave. The force threw them against the far wall. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. The lights flickered, died, then came back on under emergency power, casting long, dancing shadows. Then silence. A ringing, profound silence, broken only by the whimpering of Eri in his arms and the frantic gasps of Melissa from across the room. Eri, are you okay? Are you hurt? Izuku asked, his voice rough. He checked her over, his hands trembling slightly. I'm sorry, she sobbed, burying her face in his shirt. I'm so sorry, Deku-san. I didn't mean to. Sure, it's okay. It was an accident. You're safe. That's all that matters, he soothed, holding her tight. His hero training had kicked in instantly, but now that the immediate danger was past, the scientist in him was screaming. He looked up at the devastation. The lab was a wreck. Smoke billowed from fried circuits. The multi-million-dollar SRC was a twisted skeleton of metal and wires. Melissa was picking herself up, a cut on her forehead, her face pale with shock. Everyone, alive? She croaked. We're okay, Izuku confirmed, helping Eri to her feet. Are you hurt? Just, my pride. And several years of research, she said, her gaze sweeping over the wreckage. Her eyes, however, stopped at the epicenter of the blast. The pedestal where the synthesis vial had been was melted and slagged. But sitting in the center of the molten metal, impossibly pristine, was a single, small test vial. It was the one that had held the polymer. It hadn't shattered. It hadn't even been scratched. And it was no longer filled with a clear, viscous liquid. Inside the vial, a new substance floated. It wasn't liquid or solid. It was a crystalline suspension, a collection of impossibly small, perfectly formed geometric shards that glittered in the dim emergency lighting. They swirled in a slow, lazy vortex, emitting a faint, pale golden glow, the color of a sunrise on a winter morning. Izuku approached it cautiously, his every instinct on high alert. The substance radiated no heat, no energy he could detect with one for all. It was inert. Silent. What is that? Melissa whispered, coming to stand beside him. The reaction, it shouldn't have produced a stable solid. The combined energy should have annihilated the matter, not created something new. Rewind. One for all, and the polymer, Izuku murmured, his analytical mind kicking into overdrive, trying to piece together the impossible equation. Ares' quirk rewinds things to a previous state. But what is the previous state of a synthetic compound that has never existed before? And how did the stabilizing energy of OFA interact with that? He carefully picked up the vial. It was cool to the touch. The crystals inside swirled, catching the light. It was eerily beautiful. After ensuring Eri was settled and calm in the observation lounge with a cup of hot chocolate, under the watchful eye of a concerned hound dog who had responded to the alarms, Izuku and Melissa returned to the ruined lab. A cleanup crew was already at work, but the primary task now was analysis. The secret of what they had just created was too important to risk. They retreated to the lab's secondary analysis room, a smaller, shielded chamber that had survived the blast. For hours, they worked in a tense, focused silence. Melissa ran simulations on a backup server, trying to model the energy collision. Every result came back as a catastrophic failure. What had happened in the SRC was, according to all known physics and quirk science, impossible. Meanwhile, Izuku prepared a sample. Using a micromanipulator in a sterile containment field, he extracted one of the tiny crystals from the vial and dissolved it in a saline solution. The crystal dissolved instantly, leaving the water perfectly clear. "We can't test this on a person," Melissa stated, her voice firm. "We have no idea what it does." "I know," Izuku agreed. "But we have to know what it is." His eyes fell on a cage in the corner. UA labs often kept small animals for benign quirk interaction studies. Inside this one was a lab rat, affectionately nicknamed Sparky by the students, who possessed a minor but observable quirk. It could generate small static discharges from its whiskers, just enough to make a fluorescent bulb flicker. Izuku looked at Melissa. Her expression was a mixture of scientific curiosity and deep apprehension. "It's the only way to get a biological reading safely," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. They were meticulous. They first applied a drop of the diluted solution to the rat's fur. Nothing happened. They checked its vitals. Normal. Heart rate steady. Respiration normal. "Proceeding with microinjection," Izuku said, his voice recorded by the lab's audio log. "Dosage is 0.1 microliters of a 1% solution. Subject is a Ratus norvegicus, designated Sparky." He performed the injection with a surgeon's precision. The rat squeaked once, then went back to nibbling a piece of food. They waited. 1 minute. 5. 10. Sparky seemed perfectly fine. It scurried around its cage, sniffed at its water bottle, and groomed itself. It appeared completely unharmed. "Well," Melissa said with a relieved sigh. "At least it's not a poison." "Wait," Izuku said, leaning closer. "Try the bulb." Melissa held a small, unpowered fluorescent tube near the cage. Normally, Sparky, sensing the object, would twitch its whiskers, and the bulb would flicker with a faint white light. The rat wriggled its nose. It twitched its whiskers. Nothing happened. They tried again. Sparky gave a more pronounced twitch, a familiar habit. The bulb remained dark. The rat seemed to notice, tilting its head in confusion before losing interest and returning to its food. "Is it tired?" Melissa wondered aloud. "No," Izuku said, his voice barely a whisper. A cold dread, heavy and absolute, began to pool in his stomach. "Get the genetic sequencer. We need a blood sample. Now." The next hour was the longest of Izuku's life. They worked with a feverish intensity, drawing a drop of the rat's blood and running it through the lab's most advanced rapid sequencing machine. Izuku paced the small room, the motion a stark contrast to his usual stillness. He ran a hand through his messy green hair, his mind racing through 1,000 terrifying possibilities. The machine beeped, signaling the completion of the sequence. Melissa stared at the holographic display, her face slack with disbelief. "Izuku, come look at this." He was at her side in an instant. The display showed 2 DNA strands side by side. The first was Sparky's baseline genetic code, taken a week ago. A specific gene sequence, the one universally identified by quirk researchers as the quirk factor, was highlighted in blue. It was the source of the rat's electrical ability. The second strand was from the blood sample they had just taken. The DNA was identical in every respect but one. The section highlighted in blue on the first strand was, on the second, blank. It wasn't damaged. It wasn't rewritten. It was simply inert, as if a line of code had been perfectly and permanently deleted from the program, leaving no trace it was ever there. The quirk was gone. "It's not suppression," Melissa breathed, horrified. "Aizawa-sensei's quirk, it temporarily deactivates the quirk factor. This is like it was never there to begin with. The gene is dormant." "No, not even dormant. It's nullified." Izuku didn't answer. He stared at the screen, his hero's mind, the mind that had analyzed hundreds of quirks, that had strategized against all for one, that saw the world in cause and effect, in potential and consequence, finally grasping the true, cataclysmic nature of what they had done. They hadn't just nullified a rat's quirk. They had created a cure. A permanent, irreversible cure for quirks. The thought hit him with the force of a Detroit smash. He stumbled back, his hand catching the edge of a steel table to steady himself. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. His mind, a kaleidoscope of memories and what-ifs, began to spin. He saw a small, quirkless boy, tears streaming down his face as he watched a video of All Might, asking his mother if he could be a hero, too. This would have been the answer to that boy's prayers. He saw a young boy with explosive hands screaming that he would be the #1 hero. He saw a girl who could manipulate gravity, a boy who could command ice and fire, a class of friends, a generation of heroes, all defined by the powers they were born with. This would erase their identities, their dreams, their very essence. He saw the monstrous forms of those with mutation quirks, ostracized and feared. He saw people whose powers brought them nothing but pain and suffering. He thought of Oyama and the agonizing stomachaches his naval laser caused him. This could be their salvation. He saw Tamura Shigaraki, his hand outstretched, dust and decay spreading like a plague. He saw All for One, a legion of stolen powers within him. He saw Gigantomachia, a living mountain of destruction. This could be the ultimate weapon. A world of quirkless heroes facing a villain who could erase their power with a single dart, a single canister of gas. The quirk singularity. The prophesied moment when quirks would become too powerful and complex to control, leading to societal collapse. For years, it had been a storm cloud on the horizon. This substance, it was the flood that could wash it all away. It could prevent the apocalypse, or it could be the apocalypse. The duality of it was staggering. The sheer, earth-shattering weight of it pressed down on him, heavier than any physical burden he had ever carried. He, Izuku Midoriya, the boy who was born without a power and yearned for one more than anything in the world, had, by complete accident, created the means to return the entire world to that state. He had become a god of the quirkless. A destroyer of powers. Melissa was saying something, her voice distant and tinny, but he couldn't hear her. All he could see was the small, glowing vial on the counter. It seemed to pulse with a silent, terrible promise. The promise of an end. The promise of a beginning. He walked over to it, his movements stiff, robotic. He picked it up, his scarred fingers closing around the cool glass. In its crystalline depths, he saw his own reflection, a young man with wide, terrified eyes standing on the precipice of a choice that could save or destroy mankind. A beginning. A new creation. Genesis. An end. A return to zero. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The name formed in his mind, branded there by the terrifying significance of his discovery. Project Genesis Zero. The silence that followed the genetic sequencer's final, damning report was heavier than any collapsed building Izuku Midoriya had ever lifted. It was a silence thick with implications, a vacuum where the boisterous, chaotic world of quirks had, for a moment, ceased to exist. In the sterile confines of the secondary lab, the only sounds were the hum of the air recyclers and the frantic, syncopated rhythm of two hearts. Melissa's shield was the first to move. With the sharp, decisive motions of someone walling off a chemical spill, she began to systematically erase their digital footprint. Her fingers danced across holographic interfaces, her expression a mask of cold, professional focus. The raw data from the synaptic resonance chamber was wiped from the backup server. The logs detailing the unscheduled energy surge were corrupted and deleted. The video recording of the rat experiment was triple encrypted and buried in a partitioned drive accessible only by her unique biometric signature. Finally, she turned to the main lab's security feed from the moment of the accident. She isolated the footage, flagged it as a catastrophic equipment failure due to an unforeseen power fluctuation from the city grid, and submitted the falsified report to UA's maintenance system. "No one can know," she said, her voice flat, devoid of its usual energetic spark. "Not until we understand what this is. Not until you decide what this is." Her gaze flickered to Izuku, her blue eyes wide with a fear that mirrored his own. Izuku nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He moved with a leaden slowness, securing the vial of Genesis Zero. He placed it inside a small, padded cryocase, the kind used for transporting volatile biological samples. The soft click as the lid sealed shut sounded like a coffin closing. He then meticulously cleaned the workstation, sterilizing every surface, ensuring not a single molecule of the saline solution remained. The rat, Sparky, now just an ordinary rodent, was moved to a separate, unmarked cage. He was no longer an experiment, he was evidence. Their pact was unspoken but absolute. Project Evergreen was a failure. The explosion was an accident. And the impossible substance in the cryo case did not exist. For 2 days, Izuku tried to maintain this fiction. He went through the motions of his life. He patrolled the city, his senses on a knife's edge. He stopped a petty robbery, his movements fluid and precise, yet he felt like a stranger in his own body. The familiar crackle of One for All felt alien, a borrowed power he no longer deserved to wield. He filed his reports at the agency, his handwriting steady even as his mind fractured. He answered texts from his friends, using cheerful emojis that felt like lies. Uraraka. Heard there was a little boom at UA. Everything okay, Deku-kun? Hope you and Melissa-san are alright. His reply, all good. Just a faulty capacitor. Melissa's already redesigning it to be 200% more reliable. Classic her. Smiley face. He could feel the weight of the cryo case, even when it was miles away, locked in a secure safe in his apartment. It was a cold, dense point in the universe, a singularity of choice that warped the reality around him. He couldn't eat. Food tasted like ash. He couldn't sleep. When he closed his eyes, he didn't see Shigaraki or All for One. He saw the crystalline shards of Genesis Zero swirling in their vial, and he heard the future branching into a million terrifying possibilities. He knew, and Melissa knew, that the test on the rat was not enough. A single data point was an anomaly, not a conclusion. They needed irrefutable proof. They needed a subject with a more complex, more powerful quirk factor. They needed a Nomu. On the third night, under the cloak of a moonless sky and a manufactured security drill that cleared the lower levels of UA, Izuku and Melissa descended into the school's deepest, most secret bowels. They bypassed the gleaming new training grounds and the student dorms, taking a service elevator down to a level that didn't appear on any official schematic, the Tartarus Annex. It was not a prison like its namesake, but a high-security biological containment and research facility. This was where the Hero Commission and UA jointly studied the monstrous byproducts of villains like Dr. Garaki and All for One. The air was cold, recycled, and smelled of ozone and despair. The corridor was a stark tunnel of polished concrete, the only light coming from harsh, recessed strips along the floor. Their destination was Containment Cell 7. Behind a 2-foot-thick door of reinforced steel and a shimmering energy barrier stood a relic of the war. It was a Haiyan Nomu, one of the few captured intact. It wasn't sentient like Hood, but a bioengineered beast, a grotesque tapestry of stolen quirks stitched onto the frame of a forgotten human. It was immense, easily 9 feet tall, its skin a mottled gray and stretched taut over unnaturally dense muscle. 4 arms, too thick and brutish, too thin and whip-like, hung from its torso. Its face was a nightmare of exposed brain matter encased in a thick, translucent skull, with a gaping maw filled with needle-like teeth. According to the file, it possessed 3 primary quirks: hyperregeneration, kinetic absorption, and an electromagnetic pulse ability. It was a living siege engine, contained only by a constant stream of powerful quirk-suppressing agents being pumped into its cell. Are you sure about this, Izuku? Melissa whispered, her voice trembling as she set up a remote monitoring station. If this goes wrong, we have to be sure, Izuku said, his voice a low, grim rumble. The vial of Genesis Zero felt like a block of ice in his hand. We can't live with maybe. He had prepared the delivery system himself, a custom-built dart rifle, designed by Melissa for quiet, long-range tranquilizer delivery. Tonight, its payload was not a sedative. He loaded a single dart, its tip coated with a gel derived from a dissolved crystal of Genesis Zero. A full dose. Standing before the containment field, he took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs. The Nomu, sensing his presence, stirred. It let out a guttural roar, a sound of pure, mindless rage that vibrated through the concrete floor. It slammed a fist against the energy barrier, causing it to flare violently. This was a creature of pure power, pure destruction. It was everything wrong with the world of quirks, personified. This is a mercy, a cold, logical part of his brain supplied. Izuku raised the rifle, peering through the scope. He centered the crosshairs on the thick, corded muscle of the Nomu's shoulder. His hands were rock steady. His heart was a jackhammer against his ribs. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle let out a soft pft. The dart flew true, embedding itself in the Noma's gray flesh. The beast barely registered the prick. It roared again, preparing to strike the barrier once more, and then it froze. Its roar died in its throat, replaced by a confused gurgle. The incandescent rage in its mismatched eyes flickered, replaced by a dawning bewilderment. It looked down at its own monstrous hands as if seeing them for the first time. The exposed brain, which had been pulsing with malevolent energy, slowed its rhythm, the light within dimming. Vitals are stabilizing, Melissa reported, her eyes wide with shock as she stared at her monitor. The foreign quirk factors, the energy signatures are just vanishing. One by one. The transformation was horrific and fascinating. The Noma shuddered, a violent tremor that shook its entire frame. Its fourth arm, the thin, whip-like one, began to wither. The skin dried, cracked, and flaked away like old parchment, until the limbs simply detached and fell to the floor with a wet thud, dissolving into a pool of inert proteins. The hyperdense muscle mass began to recede, the skin sagging. The creature stumbled, its powerful legs suddenly unable to support its own weight. It fell to one knee, a low, wretched moan escaping its throat. It was not a sound of anger, but of pain and confusion. The most profound change was its face. The exposed brain tissue became opaque, a layer of skin and bone miraculously knitting itself together over the pulsating mass. The grotesque maw of teeth remained, but the mindless fury was gone. In its eyes, for the first time, there was a flicker of something other than instinct. There was a person in there, a terrified, broken person trapped inside a surgically altered cage of flesh. The Nomu, the man, collapsed onto the floor, curling into a fetal position. He was still a monster to look at, a patchwork of surgical scars and altered bone structure, but the power that had defined him, the stolen quirks that had made him a weapon, were gone. He was just a victim. Izuku lowered the rifle, his arms shaking. He had just witnessed a miracle. He had just committed an atrocity. He had saved a monster. He had violated a man. The conflicting truths crashed down on him, and he felt a wave of nausea so profound he had to lean against the wall for support. It was real. Genesis Zero was 100% effective. And it was so much worse than he had ever imagined. The following days were a private hell of Izuku's own making. He locked the cryo case containing the world's most dangerous secret in the most secure safe he owned, but he could not lock away the thoughts that plagued him. He moved into his apartment in Muzurifu, a sleek, modern high-rise that had always felt a bit sterile. Now, it felt like a tomb. He would stand for hours at the panoramic window, looking out over the glittering cityscape. Every light was a home. Every home held people with quirks, powers that were wondrous, mundane, inconvenient, or life-defining. A quirk that let someone telekinetically find their lost keys. A quirk that let a firefighter sweat pure water. A quirk that made a child's skin as tough as diamond. A quirk that allowed a hero to fly. He, Izuku Midoriya, had the power to turn all of those lights out. His mind became a battleground, two opposing armies clashing in the blood-soaked fields of his conscience. The first army was the army of salvation, led by a logical, pragmatic general who looked disturbingly like a younger version of himself, the analyst, the strategist. This general argued for the greater good, for the cold, hard calculus of saving the many. Think of the good it could do, the general's voice whispered. Think of Eri. We started this project to save her from her own power. This is the ultimate fulfillment of that promise. No child would ever have to be afraid of themselves again. He saw the faces of those who suffered. The people with monstrous mutation quirks, forced to live in the shadows, their appearances dictating their destinies. He remembered Spinner, a man so lost and ostracized that he clung to Stain's ideology like a life raft. Genesis Zero could offer them not just a cure, but a choice, to be seen for who they are, not what they look like. He thought of the countless individuals with self-destructive quirks. Powers that consumed the user's life force, that caused chronic pain, that shortened lifespans. For them, this wasn't an erasure of identity. It was a life-saving treatment. It was chemotherapy for the soul. And then there was the final, trump card, the quirk singularity. The doomsday clock of their era, ticking closer with every new generation. Quirks were becoming stronger, more complex, more volatile. The day would come when a child would be born with a power so immense and uncontrollable it would trigger a chain reaction, a global catastrophe. Genesis 0 was the answer. It was the reset button, the ultimate failsafe to prevent the end of the world. How could he, in good conscience, hoard a cure for Armageddon? It was selfish. It was cowardly. But then, the second army would counterattack. This army was a chaotic, emotional legion, and its standard-bearer was a small, crying, quirkless child, himself, at age 4. This army fought not with logic, but with passion, with identity, with dreams. "You're a hypocrite," the child's voice accused, full of tears and betrayal. "You cried because you were less than everyone else. You yearned for a power more than you yearned for air. All Might gave you that gift, a gift built on the legacy of 8 other heroes, and now you've created a way to spit on it? To destroy everything he and they stood for?" He thought of his friends. He saw Katsuki Bakugo, his hands crackling with explosive energy, his face a mask of fierce determination. Bakugo's quirk wasn't just a tool. It was his ambition, his rage, his pride, his very soul made manifest. To take that from him would be to kill him in a way more profound than any physical death. He saw Shoto Todoroki, who had finally learned to embrace his fire, to make his father's power his own. He had reconciled the two halves of himself into a single, powerful whole. Genesis 0 would shatter that hard-won piece, leaving him with nothing but the scars and the trauma. He saw Ochiko Uraraka, floating gracefully, her power an extension of her desire to help her parents, to lift people up, both literally and figuratively. He saw Tenya Ida, the engines in his legs a physical inheritance of his family's noble legacy. To use Genesis 0 on them, even with the best intentions, felt like the ultimate violation. It was the logic of Overhaul, who saw quirks as a disease and sought to purge them. Izuku was horrified by the parallel. Was he any different, just because his cure was more humane? He wanted to save the world. Overhaul wanted to rule it, but both paths began with the same premise, that they had the right to choose for others. And then came the darkest thoughts, the ones that kept him awake until the gray light of dawn. The weaponization. He imagined a new villain, a new Shigaraki, but armed not with decay, but with Genesis 0. A villain who could fire a dart, break a canister of gas, or poison a reservoir, and render an entire city of heroes as helpless as newborn kittens. He pictured himself, facing down a cataclysmic threat, reaching for one for all and finding nothing. Just the aching memory of power in his bones. The thought was so terrifying, so viscerally paralyzing, that it left him breathless. The weight of this secret was a physical thing. It was a pressure in his chest, a constant ringing in his ears. He walked through the city on patrol, a ghost among the living. He saw a mother proudly watch her daughter make a small whirlwind of leaves with her quirk, and he felt an agonizing pang of guilt. He saw a news report about a hero who had died in the line of duty, and he felt like a fraud. He was protecting a world he had the power to unravel completely. He was alone. He couldn't talk to Melissa. She was a scientist, grappling with the how and the what, but the why, the moral burden, was his. He was the wielder of one for all. He was Deku. This was his responsibility. But the isolation was crushing him. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. He was sitting in his darkened apartment, the cryo case on the coffee table in front of him. He hadn't opened it, but he stared at it as if he could see through the metal. On the television, a live broadcast showed the dedication of a new park. It was being named after a hero who had perished during the war. Her quirk had allowed her to create shields of light. The mayor was giving a speech, and in the crowd, Izuku saw the hero's husband and young son. The boy, no older than 6, suddenly pointed to the sky, and a small, shimmering disk of light, barely the size of a frisbee, flickered into existence above his hand. The crowd gasped, then applauded. The boy had inherited his mother's quirk. His father knelt, hugging him, tears streaming down his face. It was a moment of legacy, of hope, of life continuing. Izuku felt something in him snap. Who was he to even consider taking that away? Who was he to sit in judgment of the entire world, of every dream, every legacy, every person's very being? He was a hero. His job was to save people, not to remake them in an image he deemed safer. The weight was too much. The secret was too heavy. He couldn't carry it alone. He needed a mentor. He needed a father. He needed All Might. He stood up, his body moving with a purpose it hadn't felt in days. He grabbed the cryo case. He didn't bother changing out of his civilian clothes. He walked out of his apartment, the case held tightly in his hand like an anchor, and headed for the one person in the world who might, just might, understand. Tashinori Yagi's home was a small, unassuming house in a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Muzurifu. It had a neat little garden out front, which he tended to with a surprising amount of dedication. There was no grand gate, no high-tech security, just a simple wooden fence and a welcome mat that read, "I am here for a cup of tea." Izuku stood at the front door for a full minute, his hand raised to knock, his courage failing him. The cryo case in his other hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. What would he say? How could he possibly explain? "Hi, All Might. Remember that power you gave me, the sacred torch passed down through generations? Well, I accidentally used it to create a super plague that could extinguish it forever." He finally forced his knuckles to rap against the wood. The door opened almost immediately. Taishinori stood there, looking older, frielier than Izuku ever wanted to admit. His emaciated form was hidden beneath a baggy yellow sweater, but the hollows in his cheeks were deeper now. Yet his smile, when it came, was as bright and genuine as ever. "Young Midoriya! What a surprise! Come in, come in. I was just about to put the kettle on." He ushered Izuku inside. The house was cozy and filled with a quiet history. Photos lined the mantelpiece. A grinning Nana Shimura, a stern-faced Gran Torino, a young, beaming Tashinori with a fresh-faced David Shield. It was a home built on memories of power, a shrine to the legacy of One for All. And Izuku felt like a heretic entering it. "Is everything all right, my boy?" Tashinori asked, his keen eyes noticing Izuku's pale face and the tension in his shoulders. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I've created one," Izuku thought. They sat in the living room. Tashinori bustled about, preparing tea, chattering about a new documentary he'd watched. He was trying to put Izuku at ease, but it only made the knot in Izuku's stomach twist tighter. Finally, Tashinori placed a steaming cup of tea in front of him and sat opposite, his expression turning serious. "Izuku," he said gently. "Talk to me." "What's wrong?" Izuku couldn't meet his eyes. He stared down at the black, unadorned cryo case he had placed on the table between them. It looked like a scar on the warm wood of the coffee table. Something happened at the lab," Izuku began, his voice hoarse, cracking with the strain of the past week. "During the project with Eri-chan, there was an accident. An energy surge from her quirk. It interacted with a sample of my blood and the compound we were synthesizing." Tashinori listened patiently, his brow furrowed with concern. "Was anyone hurt? Is Eri all right?" "Everyone is fine." Physically, Izuku clarified, the word hanging in the air. He finally looked up, and the raw, desperate torment in his eyes made Tashinori flinch. "The accident, it created something new. We tested it." He recounted the story, his voice a low monotone. He told him about Sparky the rat, about the nullified quirk factor. He told him about the Hien Nomu in the Tartarus Annex, about the rage vanishing from its eyes, about the stolen powers dissolving into nothing. As he spoke, the warmth drained from Tashinori's face. The cheerful, retired hero faded away, replaced by the grim veteran who had faced all for one. The weight of his own history settled onto his shoulders. He stared at the case on the table as if it were a live bomb. "A cure," Tashinori breathed, the words tasting like poison. "A permanent cure. I don't know what to call it," Izuku confessed, his voice trembling now, the dam of his composure finally breaking. "A cure. A weapon. A blessing. A curse. It's all of them at once. It could end the hero/villain cycle forever. It could prevent the singularity. It could save so many people who are suffering. But it could also be used to create a global catastrophe. It could destroy everything everything you, have built. Every hero, every dream, gone in an instant." He pushed the cryo case forward with a shaking hand. The metal scraped against the wood, a harsh, grating sound in the quiet room. I can't carry this alone, All Might. I don't know what to do." Destroy it? Hide it? It feels wrong, no matter what I choose. It feels like I'm playing God. Tears he hadn't realized he was holding back began to stream down his face. He was no longer Deku, the #1 hero. He was just a boy, lost and terrified, turning to his father for an answer that didn't exist. He looked at his mentor, his predecessor, the symbol of peace, his eyes pleading. I think I've created something that could save the world, he said, his voice a choked whisper, heavy with the impossible weight of his creation. Or burn it to the ground. The warmth of the tea in Izuku Midoriya's hands did nothing to stave off the chill that had settled deep in his bones. He watched Toshinori Yagi, All Might, stare at the cryo case on his coffee table, the retired hero's face a canvas of dawning horror. The bright, reassuring smile was gone, replaced by the grim, haunted expression of a man who had stared into the abyss of All for One and was now seeing a new, more insidious darkness reflected in a simple metal box. Toshinori's gaunt frame trembled, a tremor that had nothing to do with his chronic weakness and everything to do with a fundamental shock to his soul. He had dedicated his life to a symbol, a power passed from hand to hand, a sacred torch of hope. And the boy he had chosen, his successor, his son in all but blood, had just shown him the extinguisher. A cure. Toshinori repeated, the words a wisp of air, fragile and broken. He coughed, a dry, rattling sound, his hand coming up to his mouth as he leaned forward. For a moment, he looked ancient, a relic from a bygone era that was suddenly in danger of being erased from history altogether. No. Not a cure. A weapon. An eraser. That's what it is, isn't it? It erases what we are. He finally looked up from the case, his piercing blue eyes locking onto Izuku's. There was no anger in them, only a profound, bottomless fear. Young Midoriya, do you understand what this means? It's not just about heroes and villains. It's about identity. It's about the spirit of humanity to strive, to overcome the hand we are dealt. Your quirklessness made you who you are. My injury made me who I am. Bakugo's power, young Todoroki's struggle, it is all part of the tapestry. This thing you've made, it doesn't just cut a thread. It offers to burn the entire loom. Izuku could only nod, the lump in his throat making it impossible to speak. He had considered all of this, but hearing it from All Might, the man whose entire existence was a testament to the power of quirks as a force for good, gave the thoughts a terrible, definitive weight. Toshinori pushed himself to his feet, his movements stiff. He began to pace the small living room, a caged lion stripped of its strength but not its spirit. We cannot carry this. You and I, we are too close to it. Our perspectives are skewed by the legacy of One for All. This decision, it cannot be ours alone. He stopped, his back to Izuku, and stared at a photograph on the wall, a faded picture of his master, Nana Shimura, smiling, her hand outstretched. There are only 2 other people in this world I would trust with a secret of this magnitude, he said, his voice gaining a sliver of its old authority. He turned, his eyes resolved. We are calling a council. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over his contacts. He made the first call. It was answered on the second ring. Aizawa, Toshinori said, his voice low and urgent, stripped of all pleasantries. I need you at Yui immediately. Principal Nizu's office. It is a matter of absolute, Class S importance. No, I cannot explain over the phone. Just come. And come alone. There was a pause. Toshinori listened, his expression grim. I know. Just do it. He hung up and immediately dialed another number. Principal Nizu, he said, his tone shifting slightly, a note of deference entering his voice. It's Toshinori. I apologize for the late hour, but an existential threat to the current societal structure has just emerged. Young Midoriya and I are on our way to your office. We need to speak with you and Aizawa, and we need to be certain that no one, and I mean no one, can overhear us. There was another pause, this one shorter. Toshinori's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Yes, he's with me now. And he's brought it with him. He hung up the phone. He looked at Izuku, a flicker of the old symbol of peace in his gaze. Nizu said his office will be ready in 10 minutes. And that he's already brewed the tea. Principal Nizu's office was the most secure room in Japan, and likely one of the most secure on the planet. Located at the very heart of UA's fortified main tower, it had no windows. The walls, floor, and ceiling were a seamless construction of a classified alloy interwoven with a dense mesh that blocked all forms of electromagnetic radiation and sonic vibrations. Any attempt to scan the room from the outside would yield nothing but a perfect void. When Izuku and Toshinori arrived, the heavy circular vault door hissed open to reveal Niza sitting calmly behind his large, polished desk. A pristine antique chess set was laid out beside him, a game in mid-play where white was in a commanding position. 4 teacups were already set out on a tray, steam curling gently from their spouts. The air was still and silent, the soundproofing so absolute that Izuku could hear the blood pounding in his own ears. "Toshinori, Midoriya," Niza said, his voice as placid as a mountain lake. He gestured to the 2 empty chairs. "Please sit. Shota is on his way." They sat, the silence stretching between them. Izuku placed the cryocase on the corner of Niza's desk. The principal's black, beady eyes flickered to it for a fraction of a second before returning to his tea. He showed no outward curiosity, no alarm. He simply waited, a statue of patient intelligence. The calm was more unnerving than any frantic reaction could have been. A moment later, the vault door hissed open again. Shota Aizawa slipped into the room like a shadow, his capture weapon draped around his neck, his perpetually tired eyes scanning the scene. He took in Toshinori's grim pallor, Izuku's tormented expression, and the ominous case on the desk. He didn't speak, simply taking the remaining seat and pulling a jelly pouch from one of his pockets, sipping it slowly. His presence added another layer of gravity to the room. Niza folded his small paws together on the desk. "Now then," he began, his tone suggesting they were about to discuss budget allocations and not the potential end of their world. "Izuku Midoriya, please tell us everything. From the beginning. Omit no detail, no matter how insignificant it may seem." With the 3 most influential figures in his life watching him, Izuku began his report. He spoke with the detached precision of a scientist, not the emotional turmoil of a man in crisis. He detailed the purpose of Project Evergreen, the exact chemical composition of the base polymer, the precise energy metrics of the synaptic resonance chamber. He described the moment of Aries' panic, the sound of the medical injector, the uncontrolled surge of her rewind quirk. He explained their theory of how it had interacted with the one-for-all infused catalyst and the synthetic compound. He then presented the results. The nullification of the rat's quirk factor, complete with holographic projections of the before and after genetic sequences. He concluded with the grim tale of the Heian Nomu, describing its depowering not as a victory, but as a horrifying transformation from a mindless beast into a broken, terrified man. When he finished, a profound silence descended upon the room once more. Aizawa had stopped sipping his jelly pouch, his knuckles white where he gripped it. Toshinori stared at the floor, his face etched with pain. Niza's gaze was fixed on the cryocase, his head tilted in thought. The debate, when it began, was not a storm, but a cold front, a collision of 3 powerful, unbreachable ideologies. All Might was the first to speak, his voice resonating with the passion of a preacher. "We have to destroy it," he said, his fist clenching on his knee. "Every last molecule. And we must destroy the research, wipe the servers, and take this secret to our graves. This Genesis Zero, it is an abomination. It is a perversion of the natural order." He looked at Izuku, his expression softening slightly. "My boy, I know you see the good it could do. I see it too. The end of suffering for some, a preventative for the singularity. But those are siren songs, leading us to a world devoid of spirit. Our quirks are not a disease. They are a part of us. For some, they are a burden. For others, a gift. But for all, they are a part of the struggle that defines us. To offer a universal out is to cheapen every victory, every moment of progress, every hero who ever pushed past their limits to become something more." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "And as a weapon? Think of it. A single villain, a government, a terrorist cell, if they could mass-produce this, it would be the end of heroics. The end of our ability to defend the innocent. It would be a world ruled by the powerful few who control the cure. We would be trading one form of chaos for a new, more terrible form of tyranny." It is a power too great for anyone to wield. It must be unmade, he finished, breathing heavily, the exertion of his speech taxing his frail body. He had laid out the argument of the heart, and appealed to legacy, spirit, and the inherent danger of playing God. Then Niza responded. He took a delicate sip of his tea, his small claws clicking against the porcelain. His voice was devoid of emotion, a scalpel of pure, cold logic. Destroying it is the single most illogical and dangerous thing we could do, he stated calmly. All Might recoiled as if struck. What? Nizu, how can you say that? Because, Tashinori, Nizu explained, his gaze sharp, you are focused on the object. The vial. The physical substance. But the true Pandora's box has already been opened. It is not the serum. It is the knowledge that the serum is possible. Midoriya and S.H.I.E.L.D. created this by accident. Do you truly believe that in a world of 8 billion people, with geniuses like Dr. Garaki and countless others pushing the boundaries of quirk science, that no one else will ever stumble upon this same path, or a similar one? He let the question hang in the air before continuing. To destroy this single sample is to throw away our only reference point. It is to burn the Rosetta Stone. If, or rather, when another nation or organization creates their own version of Genesis Zero, we would be completely blind. We would have no way to analyze it, no way to develop a counteragent, no way to understand its long-term effects. We would be defenseless. Niza's eyes gleamed with an unnerving, analytical light. You see a weapon. I see the ultimate deterrent. The principle of mutually assured destruction prevented nuclear war for half a century. The knowledge that Hero Society possesses the ability to create a quirk cure, held in reserve, could be the very thing that prevents a rogue state from deploying their own. Furthermore, the quirk singularity is not a theory, it is a mathematical certainty. It is the great filter of our species. Genesis Zero, as horrifying as it is, may be the only answer to it. To destroy it would be to doom future generations out of our own present-day fear. He paused, picking up a white pawn from his chessboard. The vial is not the problem. The idea is the problem. And you cannot destroy an idea. He had presented the argument of the brain, a grand, strategic vision that sacrificed the individual for the species, the present for the future. All eyes now turned to the one man who had yet to speak. Shota Aizawa had been listening, his expression unreadable behind his tired eyes and messy black hair. He was the one who walked the line between All Might's idealism and Niza's cold calculus every single day. Aizawa sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of every troubled student he had ever taught, and every villain he had ever fought. Both of you are right, he said, his voice a low rasp. And both of you are wrong. He looked at Tashinori. You talk about struggle and spirit, All Might. It's a noble thought from a man who stood at the pinnacle. But you've forgotten what it's like at the bottom. I haven't. I've seen kids whose quirks slowly poison them. I've expelled students whose powers were a danger to everyone around them. Kids who cried because they were relieved they wouldn't have to be afraid of hurting someone anymore. I fight villains every night who were once just people, cast out and reviled because their quirk made them look like a monster or act like a freak. You talk about choice, but many of them never had one. His gaze shifted to Izuku, and for a moment, it softened with a flicker of sympathy. I look at Eri, and I think this cure could give her the normal, happy childhood she was robbed of, a life without the fear that she could rewind her loved ones out of existence. How can we deny her that? How can we deny that to anyone who suffers? He let the silence sit for a moment before his gaze hardened again, turning to Niza. But you talk about it like it's a chess piece. A deterrent. A solution. You're forgetting the human cost. Let's say we release it. Or it gets out. What happens next? A new form of bigotry. A new class war. The pures versus the powered. Parents forcing it on their children who have undesirable quirks. Governments using it to pacify dissident populations. A black market for fake cures, or worse, tainted ones. You see a tool for species survival, Nizu. I see a tool for oppression and control on a scale we can't even imagine. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes finding Izuku's. I've spent my entire career teaching kids to hone their quirks, to make their power a part of their identity as a hero. I've watched you, Midoriya, turn a borrowed power into something that is uniquely yours. I've watched Bakugo forge his very soul into his explosions. To think of that being erased, it's illogical. It's a waste of potential. It's a tragedy. Aizawa was the undecided vote. He was the voice of grim pragmatism, the man who saw both the utopian promise and the dystopian nightmare with equal clarity. He embodied the dilemma itself. Izuku sat through it all, a silent spectator at his own trial. Every argument resonated within him. All Might's words fueled his guilt over betraying the legacy of One for All. Nisa's logic sparked the analytical part of his brain, forcing him to see the bigger, terrifying picture. Aizawa's conflicted realism mirrored the war in his own soul. He felt like he was being torn in 4 different directions, each one a valid and horrifying path. Finally Nisa spoke again, breaking the stalemate. It is clear we have reached an impasse. All Might advocates for destruction, which is short-sighted. I advocate for preservation and potential study, which you both find too dangerous. And Shota has eloquently argued that we should do everything and nothing at all. He steepled his paws. Therefore, a compromise is the only logical path forward. A solution that addresses all of our concerns. He looked at each of them in turn. We will not destroy it, Tashinori. We must keep the reference sample. We will not replicate it or study it further, Shota. The risk of the knowledge spreading is too great. And we will not simply hide it in a standard safe, Midoriya. The secret is too volatile. What do you propose, then? Aizawa asked, his voice laced with suspicion. I propose we build a tomb, Nisa said. A vault. Deep beneath UA, in the geologically stable bedrock. Deeper than the Tartarus Annex. A new foundation for the school, built around a single, terrible secret. It will be shielded, isolated, and secured by a lock that requires the simultaneous biometric authorization of all 4 of us. A quantum-entangled dead man's switch. If one of us dies, the lock becomes permanently sealed, inaccessible forever. The existence of this vault will be known only to the people in this room. All data, every byte of Melissa Shield's research and your own notes, Midoriya, will be stored on a single, isolated drive and interred with the vial. We will seal Pandora's box so tightly that only a unified, world-ending crisis could ever justify opening it. The proposal was audacious. It was absolute. It was a solution born of paranoia and genius. It satisfied All Might's desire for containment, Aizawa's demand for inaction, and Nisa's insistence on preservation. We would be forming a secret cabal, Aizawa stated, not as a question, but as a fact. We would be acting as responsible stewards of a power that could shatter the world, Nisa corrected him gently. It is the burden of those who know. Tashinori looked at Izuku, his expression full of a grandfather's sorrow. He saw the crushing weight Nisa's plan would place on his successor's shoulders. But he also saw the cold, inescapable logic. He gave a slow, heavy nod. Aizawa was silent for a long time. Finally, he gave a single, curt nod of his own. The decision was made. Izuku felt a sliver of relief, quickly swallowed by the immense gravity of the pact he had just entered. They would become the keepers of the apocalypse, the silent guardians of the world's most dangerous secret. Nisa stood on his chair, his small form suddenly commanding the room. Then we are agreed. From this moment on, Project Genesis Zero does not exist. The explosion was an accident. This conversation never happened. The 4 of us are now bound by this knowledge. May it be a burden we carry to our graves, and never have to use. Far away, in the heart of Tokyo, within the sterile, glass and steel headquarters of the Hero Public Safety Commission, a man sat alone in a darkened, soundproofed office. Director Kenji Tsurigami was a man who looked utterly unremarkable. He had thinning gray hair, a nondescript suit, and a face that was easily forgotten. He was the brother of the chief of police, a man deeply embedded in the establishment, seen by all as a loyal, if uninspired, bureaucrat. His quirk was equally unremarkable on the surface. Acoustic resonance imaging. He could perceive and interpret vibrations. Most thought it was a low-level lie detector, allowing him to sense a person's heart rate. But its true potential, honed over decades of secret practice, was far more insidious. By placing a small, specially tuned resonator on a building's foundation, He could feel the vibrations traveling through its entire structure. Voices, movements, machinery, they all became a complex symphony of waveforms on his monitors, a symphony he had learned to read like sheet music. For months, under the guise of monitoring for structural and ideological instabilities post-war, he had been listening to UA High School. On his main screen, a complex, jagged waveform scrolled by. It was the recording from Nisa's unbreachable office. It wasn't a clear audio feed. Nisa's tech was too good for that. It was distorted, fragmented, like a radio station drifting in and out of tune. But Tsurigami was an expert at picking out the signal from the noise. He isolated fragments, running them through a decryption algorithm of his own design. Words and phrases, stripped of their context, materialized on his screen. Accident, Ares quirk, one for all, a cure, permanent, nullified quirk factor, abomination, destroy it, ultimate weapon, solution to the singularity, seal it, a tomb, known only to US4. Tsurigami leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, thin smile spreading across his forgettable face. He didn't have the whole picture, but he had something far more powerful, the pieces of a terrifying and explosive narrative. The symbol of peace, his chosen successor, the master strategist, and the ultimate rationalist, the very pillars of hero society, were conspiring. They had created a quirk-destroying weapon, and now, they were hiding it. Hoarding it. Keeping salvation or destruction for themselves. He saved the corrupted data file, naming it simply, Project Genesis 0. He forwarded the encrypted file to a single, untraceable email address with no subject line, no body text. It was a dead drop he had established years ago. The secret was not sealed in a vault deep beneath UA High. It was out. And the world was about to hear the whispers. The 2 weeks following the council meeting were a period of surreal calm for Izuku Midoriya. The great, unmovable weight of Genesis 0 had been lifted from his solitary shoulders and distributed among 4. The secret was no longer his alone to bear, and in that shared burden, there was a strange, fragile peace. Construction on the tomb, codenamed the Well, began under the official guise of a geothermal energy project and seismic reinforcement initiative. The work was slow, meticulous, and hidden beneath layers of clearance and misdirection, a secret being buried in steel and concrete deep beneath the bedrock of UA. Izuku returned to his life. He threw himself into his hero work with a renewed, almost frantic energy. He felt a desperate need to reaffirm his purpose, to prove to himself that he was still the hero All Might had chosen. He patrolled longer, trained harder, and responded to incidents with a ferocity that bordered on reckless. The green lightning of One for All became a familiar comfort again, a roaring fire he used to burn away the chilling memory of what he had created. He was Deku, a savior, not an eraser. He had to be. He even managed to reconnect with his friends. He joined the Baku squad for a ridiculously loud and competitive yakiniku dinner, enduring Kirishima's earnest questions about his secret project and Bakugo's belligerent accusations of slacking off. He met Uraraka and Ida for coffee, laughing at Ida's rigid adherence to traffic laws even when they were walking, and feeling a familiar warmth at Uraraka's genuine concern for his well-being. He was slowly, carefully, piecing his world back together. The secret was buried. Life could go on. He was a fool to think it would be that easy. The whispers began online. It started on the fringe, in the deep web forums and encrypted chat rooms where conspiracy theories festered and grew. An anonymous post appeared on a notorious anti-hero message board, a site called QuirkLeaks. It was a fragmented, almost nonsensical collection of phrases. UA. Secret Project. Evergreen. DKU. The 9th. His blood the key. A cure. A weapon. An end. They created salvation and hid it for themselves. Project. Genesis. 0. The post was dismissed by most as the ravings of a lunatic, another bizarre fan theory cooked up by someone with too much time on their hands. But the phrases were seeds, planted in fertile, angry soil. They were picked up by other forums, shared, dissected, and debated. The name, Genesis 0, had a mythical, ominous ring to it. It was sticky. Then came the leak. Not the raw data from director Tsurigami, but a carefully curated and weaponized version of it. A video package, slickly produced and professionally narrated, was uploaded simultaneously to every major video sharing platform and social media network in the world. It bypassed content filters and moderation bots with an algorithmic sophistication that spoke of immense resources. The video opened with grainy, distorted security footage of UAE's science wing, timestamped from the night of the accident. It showed the alarms, the flash of light, the destruction. The narrator, a man with a calm, charismatic, and deeply resonant voice, began to speak. For years they have told you that quirks are a gift, the voice said, over images of heroes like Endeavor saving people from a fire. They have built a society on this foundation, a society of the powerful and the powerless. A society of endless conflict. The video then cut to darker images, cities ravaged during the Paranormal Liberation War, civilians cowering from villain attacks, hospitals filled with people suffering from quirk-related injuries, a child crying as his own mutation quirk twisted his body into a painful news shape. They told you this was the only way. That this cycle of violence was a necessary evil. They lied. The video then showed the fragmented data from Nisa's office. The phrases, now subtitled in bold, white letters, flashed across the screen. A cure. Permanent. Nullified quirk factor. Solution to the singularity. Known only to US4. In the hallowed halls of UA High, the narrator continued, his voice laced with righteous anger, your number one hero, Deku, created a miracle. A permanent cure for quirks. A way to end the suffering. A way to end the war between gods and monsters. A way to return humanity to itself. He called it Genesis Zero. The screen showed a digitally rendered animation of the crystalline serum, swirling in its vial, beautiful and terrifying. And what did he do with this salvation? What did the great symbol of peace, the brilliant principle Nizu, and the logical eraserhead decide to do with this gift to all mankind? They buried it, the narrator spat, the calm in his voice finally breaking. They formed a secret council. They decided that you were not worthy. That only they had the right to control this power. They chose to preserve their own supremacy, to perpetuate the system that makes them gods, and to leave the rest of us to suffer. The video ended with a simple, elegant drawing of a human silhouette, unadorned, standing firm, with a broken chain at its feet. Below it, the words, Humanity First Front. The powerful have made their choice, the narrator concluded. Now, it is time for you to make yours. The video went viral in a way that defied all previous records. Within an hour, it was the most watched video on the planet. Genesis Zero, Deku the Hoarder, and Humanity First Front trended globally. The world shattered. Izuku found out when his phone began to vibrate itself off his nightstand. He woke with a jolt, his heart pounding. One for All screamed a silent warning in his veins. He grabbed the phone. Hundreds of notifications flooded his screen. News alerts, missed calls, a tidal wave of messages from his agency and his friends. He clicked on the first link, from a major news network. The headline punched the air from his lungs. UA's Deku accused of creating quirk-erasing weapon in leaked Genesis Zero report. Global uproar ensues. He watched the video, his blood turning to ice. The distorted audio clips from Nisa's office. The name he had coined in a moment of terror, now a global rallying cry. The lies woven so perfectly with the truth. It was a masterpiece of propaganda. His first call was to All Might. It went straight to voicemail. His second was to Nizu. A pre-recorded message stated that the principal was in an emergency meeting with the Hero Public Safety Commission. His third was to Aizawa. It rang once, then disconnected. They were already in damage control. He was on his own. He scrolled through social media, a masochistic impulse driving him. The world he had sworn to protect had turned on him overnight. He was no longer a hero. He was a monster, a dragon sitting on a hoard of stolen hope. The comments were a vitriolic flood. So the quirkless wonder who got a power handed to him wants to make sure no one else gets to be normal. Hypocrite. My son's quirk is killing him. It causes his bones to calcify. Deku is sitting on a cure and letting my boy die. He's a murderer. Thank God for the HFF. It's time to tear down the hero system and start over. Power to the people, but the backlash was just as fierce from the other side. This is terrorism. Deku's job is to protect us, not erase us. My quirk is my identity. Hands off my quirk. This cure is a weapon of mass destruction. The HFF are just villains with a PR team. They want to make us all helpless. Deku did the right thing. No one should have this power. Destroy it. The world had not just been divided. It had been polarized into two warring camps, with him as the epicenter of the blast. The purists, who saw Genesis Zero as salvation and demanded its immediate release, and the preservationists, who saw it as an existential threat and demanded its destruction. There was no middle ground. He felt a profound, suffocating sense of vertigo. His apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a glass cage, with the entire world pressing in, screaming at him. He was trapped, a symbol of a conflict he had never intended to start. The first confrontation came sooner than he expected. He had been ordered by the Commission to remain in his apartment, under protective custody. But staying still was not in his nature. He needed to act. He needed to do something. He pulled on his hero costume, the familiar green suit feeling like a costume in the theatrical sense for the first time, and made his way to UA. He had to talk to Nizu. He had to understand how this happened. He didn't get far. As he stepped out of the private elevator into the lobby of his building, he found his path blocked. Katsuki Bakugo stood there, arms crossed, his hero costume on, his expression thunderous. The air around him seemed to crackle with contained explosions. Where the hell do you think you're going, you damn nerd? Bakugo growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Kaken, Nizuka said, surprised. I have to get to UA. Like hell you do, Bakugo snarled, taking a step forward. He jabbed a finger at Izuku's chest. I saw the video. Everyone saw the video. So you're gonna stand here and you're going to tell me, to my face, that it's a lie. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. A desperate plea disguised as a threat. He was offering Izuku an out, a chance to deny it all, to call it a lie so they could go back to the way things were. Izuku looked into his childhood friend's crimson eyes, eyes that had seen him as a pebble, a rival, and finally, an equal. And he couldn't lie. Not to him. I can't, Izuku said, his voice barely a whisper. It's complicated, Kaken, but the basics, they're true. I created it. For a moment, Bakugo just stared at him. The explosive rage Izuku expected didn't come. Instead, a look of profound, wounded betrayal washed over his face. It was the same look he'd had when he discovered the truth about One for All, magnified 1,000 times. You! Bakugo began, his voice shaking with a mixture of disbelief and fury. You, the quirkless crybaby who followed me around, who scribbled in those creepy notebooks about how amazing everyone's powers were, you made a thing to get rid of them? That wasn't the intention. Izuku insisted, taking a step forward. It was an accident. We were trying to help Eri. I don't give a damn about your intentions. Bakugo roared, and this time, the explosions came. Small, sharp blasts popped from his palms, filling the lobby with the smell of nitroglycerin. Our power, my power, it's what makes us who we are. It's the struggle. It's the climb to the top. Everything I have, everything I am, I clawed for it, I bled for it, and you cooked up a way to just turn it off? Like a light switch? His voice grew quieter, but infinitely more venomous. Are you trying to erase me, Deku? The question hung in the air, raw and deeply personal. It wasn't about heroics or society. It was about their entire shared history, about the two of them, defined since childhood by the chasm between their powers. Izuku had finally crossed that chasm, and now, it seemed to Bakugo that he had built a bridge just so he could burn it down, taking everyone with him. No! Kaken, never! Izuku pleaded. You have to understand. I understand perfectly, Bakugo spat, turning away from him in disgust. You finally got all the power in the world, and you got so scared of it you built a button to destroy it all. You're still the same useless, scared Deku you always were. He didn't say another word. He stalked out of the lobby, leaving Izuku standing alone, the acrid smell of smoke and the sting of Bakugo's words burning in his throat. The rift between them, so carefully mended over the years, had just been torn open into a gaping wound. He found his next visitor waiting for him on the rooftop, the designated extraction point for his protective detail. Shoto Todoroki stood near the edge, looking out over the city. The wind whipped at his bicolored hair. He didn't turn as Izuku approached. I spoke to my father, Shoto said, his voice calm and even, a stark contrast to Bakugo's explosive rage. He is displeased. He called Genesis Zero an affront to the ambition of humanity. He's demanding the Commission destroy it and publicly censure you. It was one of the longer conversations we've had in years. He finally turned, his mismatched eyes studying Izuku with an unnerving intensity. When I first heard, my first thought was, my mother. I thought about how a thing like this could have saved her. If my father had never developed his quirk, if I had never been born, my family's entire tragedy could have been prevented. Izuku's heart ached with sympathy. Shoto, But then, Shoto continued, cutting him off, I thought about what that would mean. It would mean the man I am now would not exist. The man who learned to use his fire, who reconciled with his mother, who is trying to become a hero on his own terms, he would have been erased before he was ever born. My past is a part of me. My power is a part of me. Even the ugly parts. He took a step closer, his expression not angry, but deeply, profoundly sad. I understand the appeal, Midoriya. Better than most. The desire to undo the past, to cure the pain. But you can't. All we can do is choose what we do with the present. By creating this, you have taken that choice away from everyone. There was no accusation in his voice, only a statement of fact. It was, in its own way, more cutting than Bakugo's fury. Bakugo was fighting for his own identity. Shoto was mourning the potential loss of everyone's. The final visit was the one that broke what little composure Izuku had left. As he stood on the rooftop, waiting for the transport that was now indefinitely delayed, the door to the stairwell opened. Achiko Uraraka stood there, her hero costume on, her face pale with worry. She didn't speak. She just ran to him, closing the distance between them, and wrapped her arms around him in a fierce hug. Izuku froze, his entire body rigid with tension and guilt. Are you okay? She whispered into his shoulder, and the simple, earnest question shattered his defenses. He wasn't okay. He was the most hated man on the planet. He was a pariah and a messiah. His oldest friend thought he was a traitor. His trusted comrades saw him as a threat to free will. He was drowning. A choked sob escaped his lips, and he finally let himself collapse into her embrace, his body shaking with suppressed grief. He wasn't thinking about Genesis Zero, or the HFF, or the fate of the world. He was just a young man, terrified and alone, and his friend was asking if he was okay. I didn't know what to do, he mumbled against her shoulder, the words muffled by his tears. I still don't. Uraraka just held him tighter. She wasn't there to judge him, to praise him, or to condemn him. She wasn't worried about the cure, or the politics, or the global crisis. She was worried about him, about the crushing psychological burden he was carrying. You're not alone in this, Deku-kun, she said softly, her hand rubbing soothing circles on his back. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. Her simple act of kindness, of unconditional support, was a single point of light in an encroaching darkness. But it wasn't enough to hold back the tide. As he stood there, finding a brief moment of solace in his friend's arms, his phone buzzed. It was a priority alert from the Commission. A city-wide notification. Protests, organized with terrifying speed by the Humanity First Front, had erupted all over Muzurifu. The purists were marching, their numbers swelling by the minute. They were demanding the release of Genesis Zero. They were chanting his name, and they were marching on Uehai. Izuku pulled away from Uraraka, his face hardening, the tears drying, replaced by a grim resolve. His personal pain didn't matter anymore. He looked out over the city. In the distance, he could see plumes of smoke rising. The whispers in the dark had become a roar. The fire was lit. He was no longer just a hero. He was a symbol of a terrifying new age, standing on a precipice, watching the world he loved begin to burn, with his own creation as the spark. And in that moment, he had never felt so utterly, completely alone. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a tidal wave of human sound that crashed against the outer walls of Uehai. It was a chaotic symphony of rage, desperation, and a strange, fervent hope. From the vantage point of Principal Neese's office, now a frantic command center, the scene below was a sea of angry, determined faces, illuminated by the harsh glare of news helicopters and the flickering orange of burning barricades. Thousands of protesters, a volatile coalition of purists, had converged on the school. They were a cross-section of society that heroics had left behind. There were quirkless individuals, their faces etched with a lifetime of resentment, holding signs that read "We were born cured and share the gift, Deku." There were people with minor, useless quirks, who felt cheated by the genetic lottery. And most heart-wrenching of all, there were families holding pictures of loved ones afflicted with painful, debilitating, or monstrous quirks, their eyes pleading for the salvation they believed was locked away inside. But this was no peaceful protest. Mixed within the civilian ranks was the hard core of the Humanity First Front. They were not chanting. They were disciplined, organized, and armed. Clad in simple gray fatigues and black tactical vests, their faces obscured by gas masks and helmets, they moved with a purpose that sent a chill down Izuku's spine. They carried not just signs, but crowbars, riot shields, and strange, sophisticated devices that hummed with a low, threatening energy. "They've disabled the outer perimeter's primary security systems," Niza stated, his voice dangerously calm as he watched a dozen monitors at once. "They're using localized EMPs to fry the circuitry. It's military-grade hardware. Our friend Erasmus is either extremely well-funded or has a brilliant engineer. Or both," Aizawa growled from beside him, his eyes glowing a faint red as he scanned the crowd, his quirk useless against such numbers. "They're using the civilian protesters as human shields. Any large-scale move we make against the HFF militants risks massive collateral damage. It's a logistical nightmare." The air in the office was thick with tension. Pro-heroes, the faculty of UA and a handful of top-ranked responders like Hawks and Mirko, were spread thin, forming a defensive line just inside the main gate. All Might stood beside Izuku, his skeletal form radiating a palpable anxiety. He wasn't just watching a riot, he was watching his legacy come under siege. "This is my fault," Izuku murmured, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The green suit of his hero costume felt like it was crawling on his skin. He was the reason these people were here. He was the focus of their hope and their hatred. "This is the fault of a zealot twisting your discovery for his own ends," All Might corrected him, his voice firm. "Do not let them weaponize your guilt, my boy. That is exactly what they want." As if on cue, a new voice cut through the din of the crowd. A series of powerful speakers, mounted on HFF vans, crackled to life. It was the same calm, charismatic voice from the video. "People of Japan. Heroes of UA." The voice of Erasmus boomed, silencing the crowd. "We are not here as aggressors. We are here as petitioners. We have come for what is rightfully ours, for what is rightfully humanity's." A spotlight from one of the vans illuminated the front gate, where Endeavor, his flames burning low and controlled, stood at the head of the hero line. "You hoard a cure that could end generations of suffering," Erasmus declared. "You hide a weapon that could end the age of villains. And for what? To protect your status? To maintain your grip on power? To keep yourselves as gods while the rest of us remain mere mortals?" His voice dropped, becoming intimate, seductive. "We are not here to fight you. We are here to ask you, to beg you, to join us. Lay down your arms. Open your gates. Give us Genesis 0, and together, we can build a new world. A better world. A world without fear, without monsters, without the genetic tyranny that has plagued us for centuries." Endeavor's response was a low, rumbling growl. "Disperse now, and the Commission will consider leniency. Continue this farce, and you will be met with force." Erasmus chuckled, the sound amplified and distorted by the speakers. "Force? You see, that is your only answer. Your power is your only language. You have proven our point. We had hoped for reason. You have chosen violence. So be it." The moment the last word left his lips, the siege began. It was not a chaotic rush. It was a coordinated, tactical assault. The HFF militants at the front line activated their devices. A high-frequency sonic wave, tuned to disorient and nauseate, washed over the hero line. Simultaneously, they launched canisters that spewed a thick, viscous foam that hardened on contact, trapping several heroes, including the formidable Cementos, in place. "They've prepared for our quirks," Hawks reported over the comms, his voice tight as he dodged a volley of foam from above. "This is a specialized anti-hero operation." Under the cover of this initial shock and awe assault, a heavily armored HFF truck, a snowplow-like wedge welded to its front, surged forward. It slammed into the main gate of UA, with a deafening shriek of tortured metal. The gates, designed to withstand a gigantomachia-level assault, buckled, groaned, but held. Then, from the ranks of the HFF, a new figure emerged. A woman in a bulky, mechanized exoskeleton. Wires snaked around her arms, glowing with a purple energy. "That's one of their commanders," Nisa observed. "Quirk, metal fatigue. She can weaken the molecular bonds of any metallic alloy." The woman placed her hands on the dented gate. The purple energy surged, and the advanced metal of the UA gate began to flake and corrode, turning to rust and dust before their eyes. With a final, groaning screech, the gate collapsed inward. The crowd surged forward, pouring into the school grounds like water through a broken dam. "They're in!" Aizawa yelled. "All units, fall back to the main building. Form a defensive perimeter at the entrance. Midoriya, you stay here. You are the objective. You cannot be on the front lines." "No," Izuku said, his voice cold and hard. He turned to face the room, the green lightning of One for All starting to crackle around him, a tempest of contained power. His eyes glowed with an intensity that made even All Might take a step back. "They came here for me. They're using my name. My creation. They want a symbol? They'll get one. But it won't be the one they're expecting." He was not asking for permission. Before anyone could stop him, he was moving. He strode to the office window, which overlooked the central courtyard now swarming with invaders. Without hesitation, he drew back his fist. "Detroit smash," he whispered, not to the room, but to himself. He punched the reinforced glass. It didn't just shatter, it atomized. He leaped through the opening, a green comet descending into the heart of the chaos. He landed in the courtyard with a ground-shaking impact that sent cracks spiderwebbing across the pavement, and threw a dozen HFF militants off their feet. He rose to his full height, the emerald lightning of One for All flaring around him, casting his face in stark, determined shadow. He was a beacon of pure, terrifying power in the midst of the invasion. A hush fell over the immediate area. The civilian protesters froze, staring in awe and fear at the living legend they had been decrying. The HFF militants hesitated, their training screaming at them about the threat level that had just appeared in their midst. "You want Genesis Zero?" Izuku's voice boomed, amplified by his power. It cut through the air, clear and sharp. "You want the thing that I created? Then you'll have to go through me. And I promise you, I will not make it easy." It was a declaration of war. He was no longer hiding. He was embracing the terrible irony of his position. He would use the full, devastating power of One for All to protect the very substance that could strip it away from him forever. A militant, emboldened by fanaticism, charged him, brandishing a weapon that looked like an electrified cattle prod. Izuku didn't even flinch. With a flick of his finger, he unleashed a pinpoint blast of pressurized air, a Delaware smash air bullet. It struck the man in the chest, not with killing force, but with enough impact to send him flying backward into a dozen of his comrades, scattering them like bowling pins. The spell was broken. The HFF opened fire. But they weren't using bullets. They fired strange, net-like projectiles designed to entangle and discharge electricity. They launched sonic grenades and canisters of disorienting gas. It was a tactical, non-lethal assault designed to subdue a powerful hero. Izuku became a whirlwind of green energy. He moved with a speed that was almost impossible to track. He used Black Whip, the tendrils of dark energy erupting from his arms, not to strike, but to disarm. He snatched weapons from their hands, tore down their barricades, and webbed groups of them together. He used Float to stay airborne, making him an impossible target. As he fought, the screams and chants of the crowd became a disorienting background noise. "Hypocrite!" A man screamed from the edge of the fighting, his face contorted in rage. "You use your power to keep us powerless. My daughter deserves a normal life." A woman cried, holding up a photo. "You're a monster, Deku!" Each word was a blow, more painful than any physical attack. He was fighting to protect them, and they hated him for it. He was defending the sanctity of UA, a school that now housed the object of their messianic hope. The irony was a physical weight, pressing down on him with every move he made. He saw the woman in the exoskeleton making a break for the main building's entrance. The heroes there, Present Mike, Midnight Ectoplasm, were being bogged down by a coordinated wave of militants using anti-quirk foam. Izuku shot forward, landing directly in her path. "You're not getting inside," he said, his voice low. "You can't stop progress, hero," she sneered, her hands glowing with purple energy as she lunged at him. She tried to touch his arm, to corrode the metal braces of his costume. Izuku sidestepped, the move impossibly fast. He grabbed her by the back of her exoskeleton, lifted her clean off the ground, and with a grunt of effort tore the power pack from her back. The suit sputtered and died, collapsing around her. He left her webbed to the ground with Black Whip. Suddenly, a voice, sharp and explosive, cut through his calms. "Stop trying to be a one-man army, you damn nerd! Look to your left." Izuku glanced to his left just as a massive explosion ripped through a phalanx of HFF militants who were attempting to flank him. Katsuki Bakugo descended from the sky, using his explosions like rocket thrusters, his face a mask of furious concentration. "Kaken!" Izuku gasped, surprised and relieved. "Don't get the wrong idea!" Bakugo roared, unleashing a blinding AP shot that forced a new wave of attackers to dive for cover. "I'm not here to save your sorry ass. I'm here because these bastards are attacking my school and spouting garbage about making people like me normal. I'm here to remind them what a real quirk looks like." He was a force of nature, a maelstrom of light and sound. His rage, usually a destructive force, was now a focused, devastating weapon. He wasn't just fighting, he was making a statement. Every explosion was an argument against Genesis Zero, a violent declaration of his own identity. They fell into a familiar rhythm, an unconscious dance they had perfected over years of rivalry and grudging respect. Izuku was the unstoppable force, controlling the battlefield, disabling and containing. Bakugo was the immovable object, a zone of pure destruction that no one could get near. Izuku used Black Whip to pull a group of militants together, and Bakugo would hit them with a non-lethal stun grenade blast. Izuku would clear a path, and Bakugo would charge through it, scattering their lines. They were fighting back to back, a seamless unit. But the tension between them was a tangible thing. They were fighting for the same goal, protecting UA, but for entirely different, deeply personal reasons. Bakugo was fighting for the right to exist as he was. Izuku was fighting to contain the consequences of his own creation. "On your right!" Izuku shouted, seeing a sniper with a high-powered tranquilizer rifle taking aim at Bakugo from a rooftop. Before Bakugo could react, a massive wall of ice erupted from the ground, blocking the shot. Shoto Todoroki slid into the courtyard on a ramp of his own making, his left side already beginning to frost over. "It seems you two are having all the fun," Shoto said, his voice calm as ever. He sent a wave of ice across the ground, freezing the feet of 24 militants in place. He followed it up with a controlled burst of fire from his left hand, creating a wall of flame that forced the section of the crowd to retreat. "Icy hot! Stay out of my way!" Bakugo snarled, though there was no real heat to it. "I am not here for you, Bakugo," Shoto said coolly. He glanced at Izuku. "The HFF's ideology is flawed. They believe taking away quirks will bring peace. They are wrong. It will only create a new kind of weakness, a new vulnerability to be exploited. We must demonstrate the flaw in their logic." Like Bakugo, Shoto fought with a purpose beyond simple defense. His quirk, the source of his family's trauma, was now the tool he used to protect the very concept of individual power. He was a living refutation of Erasmus's philosophy. The three of them, the new generation's big three, formed a trinity of power at the heart of the siege. Deku, the symbol of overwhelming strength and restraint. Bakugo, the embodiment of explosive, untamable will. Todoroki, the master of elemental balance and control. They were magnificent. And they were turning the tide. The HFF's coordinated assault began to break down under their combined pressure. The civilian protesters, seeing their militant vanguard being systematically dismantled by just 3 heroes, began to falter, their righteous anger giving way to awe and fear. But Erasmus was no fool. He had anticipated this. Phase 2, his voice commanded over the HFF comms, a command intercepted and relayed by Nisa. Draw them out. Isolate the target. Suddenly, the nature of the attack changed. The militants stopped trying to push forward. Instead, they began a tactical retreat, firing sticky grenades and deploying smoke screens as they fell back toward the ruined main gate. They're retreating? Izuku said, confused. We're winning. It's a trap, you idiot! Bakugo yelled. They're pulling us away from the main building. At that exact moment, a new alert flashed on Nisa's main screen. A high-energy reading from the opposite side of the campus. The engineering wing. It was a diversion. Nisa realized, his fur bristling. Their main force wasn't at the front gate. A secondary team, equipped with stealth technology, bypassed the front and tunneled in from the maintenance shafts. They're going for the labs. Why the labs? All Might asked, his voice thin with dread. The serum isn't there. No, Nisa said, his black eyes wide with horror, as he brought up a new schematic. But the one person who knows how to make it is. And so is the only other living component of the original formula. The siege wasn't about retrieving the vial. It was about securing the means of production. Their targets were Melissa's shield and Eri. The battle in the courtyard became a desperate race against time. Izuku, Bakugo, and Todoroki had to fight their way back through the retreating, now fanatically defensive, HFF forces. Every step was a struggle. The militants were no longer trying to subdue them. They were trying to delay them, sacrificing themselves to buy their comrades time. I'll clear a path, Bakugo roared. He put his hands together, a massive, blinding light building in his palms. Howitzer impact. He unleashed his super move, a colossal explosion that tore a hole in the HFF lines, sending bodies flying. It gave them the opening they needed. Izuku didn't hesitate. He poured every ounce of power he could into One for All, activating full cowl at 100%. The green lightning around him became a solid aura. I'm going ahead, he yelled. He shot forward, a green blur that was barely human. The world became a smear of color and sound. He crossed the campus in seconds, the wind screaming past his ears. He arrived at the engineering wing to find a scene of chaos. The doors had been blasted open. Yui's security bots lay in pieces. Power loader was down, his armored suit breached, and a handful of support course students were huddled behind a barricade of overturned tables. And in the center of the main workshop, the HFF's main force had cornered their prize. Melissa's shield stood protectively in front of a terrified Eri, shielding her with her own body. They were surrounded by a dozen of the most elite HFF militants, led by a towering man in a heavily modified exoskeleton. Melissa's shield, the commander said, his voice a metallic rasp. Erasmus sends his regards. You will be instrumental in the dawn of a new age. Stay away from her, Melissa said, her voice shaking but defiant. We have no desire to harm the girl, the commander said. We only need her for a baseline reading. To ensure your new batches of the cure are up to specification. The casual cruelty of his words, the idea of using Eri as a lab rat again, sent a surge of pure, unadulterated rage through Izuku. It was a rage he hadn't felt since he faced Overhaul. He didn't announce his presence. He didn't make a grand entrance. He simply appeared. One moment, the commander was speaking. The next, Izuku's fist was buried in the center of his exoskeleton. The advanced armor crumpled like tin foil. The commander was thrown backward, unconscious before he hit the ground. The other militants turned, raising their weapons, but it was too late. Black whip erupted from Izuku's body, a storm of dark tendrils that filled the room. In seconds, every militant was disarmed, entangled, and slammed against the walls, held fast. The fight was over before it truly began. Izuku stood there, breathing heavily, the green lightning slowly receding. The rage was still there, a hot coal in his chest. He turned to Eri, his expression softening instantly. Are you okay, Eri-chan? Eri, tears streaming down her face, nodded and ran to him, burying her face in his leg. Melissa let out a long, shuddering breath of relief. Izuku, thank you. The sounds of battle from outside were dying down. The heroes had successfully repelled the HFF's diversionary force. The siege was broken. Yuri was secure. But as Izuku looked at the ruined lab, at the terrified faces of Eri and Melissa, he felt no sense of victory. They had won the battle, but the implications of the HFF's strategy were terrifying. They hadn't just attacked the school. They had exposed a fundamental weakness. They had proven that a small, dedicated army, armed with the right technology and a powerful ideology, could bring the symbol of hero society to its knees. The world had watched it happen, live on global television. They had witnessed a force willing to fight and die to get their hands on Genesis Zero. The secret in the vial had been a philosophical crisis, a burden for 4 men in a locked room. Now, it was a tangible prize. A holy grail. And the first crusade for its possession had just ended, leaving the world knowing that a second one was not just possible, but inevitable. The stakes had been raised from a hidden secret to a global war waiting to happen.